Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. My name's Adam Pieper, for those I've already had a chance to talk to outside. Tonight is about introducing this project that we're just getting started with, sharing information, kind of our process, and hopefully answering some questions and generating interest so that you provide input and follow along with us as we continue. I am with a firm called Rundell Ernstberger Associates, and we are leading the project team, assisting the city on this plan. I'll just point out quickly Andrew Orr, who is the city's project manager for the endeavor. He's the long-range planning supervisor. Eric Connor, Emily, Vernon, we've got a number of city folks here to answer questions when we're done. And then also on the engineering side, which is a significant component of this project, Jimmy Wiseman and Brian Goodwin. I'm joined by my colleague Cynthia Bowen from REA. And then we have a couple other consultant partners on this project. CDM Smith is going to be analyzing transportation and utility components. And where did Brandon go? Oh, Brandon's over there. His colleague Tom couldn't be with us tonight. And then finally, Tischler Bice and Colin. And they are looking at the kind of fiscal impact of development and some of the financing and phasing strategies. Just briefly, we're going to do kind of a process, an overview, a little background of the project, talk about some of the previous plans and what they say for this area, how that's going to inform our recommendations going forward, some of the preliminary analysis we've done to date, and then if you haven't participated in any of the input exercises, I'm going to encourage you to do that. I'll also say if anybody didn't sign in, we would please ask you to do that on your way out. There's also an opportunity to leave us your email if you want to be contacted about future project updates, meetings, and all that good stuff. So just briefly, this is a statement from the project RFQ that we responded to that I think summarizes really why we're here more succinctly than I probably would. In the most basic, there have been a number of parcels, 815 acres, annexed into the city that are outside of the current urban growth boundary, which means they've never been included in a previous city planning exercise. So at a minimum, we need to identify what may be appropriate on those properties so that as development proposals may come in, the city has a response, right? To say, look, we've talked about this and here's what we think is appropriate, what can be served adequately by the transportation system, by water and sewer utilities. So that's the baseline, like I said. And again, really going back, this started in 2018 when the city identified some of this area as a short-term annexation capability. The last couple years, 815 acres, like I said, have been annexed from outside the UGB. Those have all been voluntary annexations. And I'll point that area out on the map on the next slide. And then, like I said, so our process actually started mid-last year with responding to the RFQ. We interviewed with the city and actually got started with our analysis and everything basically in November. Also late last year, the city did finalize a recommendation for area to potentially be added to the UGB. That has not been approved by the county yet, so it's just a recommendation. But certainly moving forward later this year, next and into the near future, the city anticipates additional annexation requests and certainly development petitions for some of those properties. In terms of the project area, we kind of have two. From a land use and utilities standpoint, we're generally looking at the area east of I-65 and south of Long Lane, which comprises about 2,500 acres. But knowing any development that may occur on those 2,500 acres is going to have impacts to the transportation system, certainly outside of that smaller bounding box there. That's the larger dashed rectangle. So from the transportation study standpoint, we're looking at basically over Lewisburg and up to kind of an imaginary line if you continued Henpeck east-west. That includes 18 existing intersections that are going to be in a traffic model, 7 new intersections based on recommendations or new roadways that are in the Connect Franklin plan, and then examining the potential of a new interchange just north or a little bit north of the 65 and 840 current interchange. Beyond just answering that planning question for those 815 acres, our approach to this study really focuses on answering these 3 questions. What does the community support? That's why we're here tonight. What does the market support? Like I said, that's what we're going to have Colin and his team helping us with. And then what does the site and also infrastructure support? So that's our land use planning and transportation analysis. Ideally, all those things overlap perfectly, and everyone is on board with a future direction. Obviously, we know that is frequently not the case, so we have to understand where these gaps are. If the community is supportive of less dense development, for example, but that is not financially feasible given infrastructure investments that need to be made, how does that gap get financed so that everyone can come out pleased with the outcome? So more detailed approach or anticipated outcomes, like I said, obviously outreach to you all, understanding what your interests are as residents either in the area or nearby, property owners, professionals associated with development. But answering that, what is the market support for various development types? What happens in a build-out scenario to those different development types and mixes or densities? What does that do to the transportation system? What size pipes are required for water and sewer? How expensive does that get? So that we can understand what improvements are needed to support different growth scenarios. Also an important part of that is identifying natural features to be preserved. Again, the current city plans only identify conservation areas within the UGB. So now that we're getting property already in the city outside of the UGB and this potential extra area, that needs to be included in this process. So like I said, the significant transportation focus and creating a model. I'm not going to try and explain the PTP Vistro software because I don't understand enough about it, but Brandon does, and that's what's important. But creating a tool, the city's already developed this for the Cool Springs area. They're going to be building it out and expanding it for Goose Creek so that we can use it on this process, but also as future development petitions come in, plans may change. Those can be quickly updated for future traffic impact analyses. Like I said, understanding the fiscal impacts of these different land uses to ensure they're sustainable from a fiscal standpoint over time, and then how that aligns in terms of funding and phasing. Oh, sorry. Generally, we kind of break our process into 4 phases. Right now, we're at this kind of overlap in January between discovery and visioning, but we're going to be trying to coordinate and obviously conduct outreach throughout this process. But our other discovery tasks, analyzing past planning efforts, the development entitlements that have happened or occurred for the area, so things that essentially have been improved but not constructed. We need to make sure those are accounted for in our scenarios in the traffic analysis. Again, those other things I talked about, the market demand, and then summarizing this with an existing conditions report. But where we are is obviously community meeting 1. And in addition to tonight's meeting, we started some stakeholder discussions earlier this afternoon. We have some additional meetings tomorrow and next week. But then after that, we've kind of ideally start to see some common themes, and I think we already have. And that's going to inform our land use scenarios. We'll work with staff on that as well. Those inputs go into the model so we can understand, again, making sure that this all balances from an impact and feasibility standpoint. Providing an update to BOMA and the Plan Commission. After that, we tweak our scenarios into a final recommendation. Ultimately, we're going to get to 2 scenarios. One that includes that new I-65 interchange, and one that does not, because that is very much not decided and would have significant impacts on what type of development, how much development could occur in the area. So we know we have to plan for that. And then, like I said, breaking it down into a series of identifiable or more definable infrastructure projects and how those are funded. We'll ultimately come back with a second community meeting to share those scenarios before we would finalize our report. And obviously, if there's changes that need to be made, we'll do that. And then a final presentation to BOMA. And this is all to be wrapped up in June of this year. So I'll just briefly talk about previous plans and projects. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but Envision Franklin is the land use plan that is used as a tool to guide decisions by the Plan Commission, BOMA, and allow staff to provide feedback or direction to the development community. The primary design concepts included in Envision Franklin for this area are the regional commerce and the neighborhood mixed use. So the regional commerce is the dark purple on the map. Neighborhood mixed use is kind of the lavender color. Both of those obviously indicate a high intensity, activity, mixed use activity center adjacent to the interstate. But what we are going to need to determine going forward is how does that transition to this newly annexed area and what may be future UGB. Connect Franklin, the city's long-range transportation plan, which was originally adopted about 7 years ago and has been amended a few times to update project recommendations, includes, well, we've got 7 up here. There's more than that because there are some improvements to existing roadways, but from a new roadway or new segment standpoint, an extension of Goose Creek, the Goose Creek bypass or Paytonsville Road, east to what will also be a Carruthers Parkway extension. Does my cursor show up here? Yeah, okay. So this Goose Creek bypass extension to the east, and then a Carruthers Parkway extension to the south. Ultimately, beyond that new roadway, these are by no means final alignments, but they're just generally depicting a potential connection. So that would come down to what is Paytonsville Road down here. And then this new Paytonsville to Lewisburg connection, which would facilitate this new interchange creation right here. It may not be an interchange, it may just be a grade separated intersection, so like an over-underpass where you wouldn't have access to the interstate. And again, we're going to be analyzing the impacts of that. How much does that help the transportation network in the area if it's not a full interchange? The Long Lane Overpass, which has been on the books for quite some time. and then finally a Macklemore Road extension to the west, but that starts to get out of our area. Like I mentioned earlier, we also need to understand what the in-progress developments are, or the approved development entitlements. To varying degrees, you can see like Ladd Park, the pale yellow area in the northeast, significantly more built out than, let's say, some of the Berry Farms, the Chadwell tract, which is the southwest quadrant of the interchange, or the Berry Farms tract, which is the southeast quadrant of the interchange. But collectively, there's over 3 million square feet of office and retail space in this area that's been approved but not constructed, 450 hotel beds, over 2,000 apartments, more than 800 single-family homes. So again, we understand we need to analyze the current transportation network. We need to analyze the current what the transportation network looks like when these projects come online, and then what could be handled or accommodated going into the future for these additional areas.
Could you show us where the 800 single-family homes are?
Most of those are in the South Vale and South Brook projects, most of the single family in the area. So one of the factors we use in informing our land use planning exercise is this parcel suitability analysis. So we look at every parcel in the study area, and right now we've conducted this for 9 different factors. And so these are kind of the individual factors here, everything from flood hazard areas, hillsides and hilltops, proximity to sewer service, fire stations, and so on. And they are, each parcel is ranked or assigned a numerical value based on these factors, and then we weight them to create an overall suitability analysis. So things like amount of overlap with flood areas or hilltops are more negatively weighted than, say, the benefit of proximity to a commercial center. And this is something that will be updated throughout the process, as well as, like I said, we identify new areas for preservation as some of these planned roadway segments may come online or other transportation improvements are made. We want to understand what that does to development suitability and be better prepared maybe to anticipate development petitions or plan development on those sites. So from an overall standpoint, and again, this is a relative analysis, this is what the study area looks like. Just because a parcel is red doesn't mean it's completely undevelopable. It may just mean it is more significantly impacted, like I said, by that floodway, or it could be farther from sewer service. So we know it's either tougher or it's just going to be more expensive, and subsequently maybe a little farther down the line.
Hey, Adam,
Yeah.
can you share that it's still a draft?
Yep, and like I said, this is a draft. Like I said, we will be adding additional data to this analysis as the project progresses and we begin to formulate recommendations for some of these other projects.
So when it says hillsides and hilltops,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean, is it feasible to build on those hillsides and hilltops?
No.
Or are they in danger are you looking at the physical viability of?
Yeah, so that analysis is based on the city's current hillsides and hilltops overlay district, which restricts development within those areas. So that's why on the individual map, you see the red parcels are the ones that have a large portion of them within that overlay. But like I said, that overlay doesn't go outside city limits because the city doesn't zone outside city limits. So that's not currently accounted for. Yep. So that's my brief spiel and introduction to kind of the background of our process. Like I said, if you haven't participated in the input exercises, the information I just shared, most of it's outside as well. But we do have some maps where we'd ask for your input geographically on opportunities in the area, also potential issues. These could be, like I said, they could be transportation related if there's a roadway alignment that isn't safe. If you think one parcel is a better opportunity for a certain use than another, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Basically, you take one of the little numbered stickers, put it on the map, and then fill in that numbered blank for what you think is important to know about that location. We have a little exercise where we ask you to take some monopoly money and how you would budget city funds in terms of either infrastructure projects, parks, open space, trails, preservation, things like that. Trying to get a better understanding of what you all think are the appropriate development types in the area, and I know that's an oversimplification because some development may be appropriate right next to the interstate, but not 2 miles down Paytonsville Road. But we can't get too detailed with that, but we do want to generally get your input on what you would like to see. And then the last one involves just Post-it notes, big picture. If we can accomplish one thing for you through this process, that's what we'd like to know. So if it's preserving one area, if it's realizing some type of new development, that's what we're interested in.
These exercises that you have.
Yes, sir.
Are they available for people that are not able to attend today? The group here doesn't represent the entire population.
Sure.
Of that basin, so.
Yeah.
Is there an online version of this or some type of form that they can fill out to provide input?
Yep. Well, I'll get to that in 1 second. So, in terms of contact, any of you all are welcome to reach out to Andrew or myself. Share our contacts with anyone you know that you would think would be interested in providing input. This franklintn.gov/Goose Creek is a page on the city's website that will be updated periodically throughout this process, and we are going to be exploring some online engagement mechanisms to be included on that. I know the timing of this in-person community meeting was not ideal given current public health trends.
So the plan for a follow-up meeting like this before the draft is complete, or is it, because you had a second meeting planned?
Yep.
But that meeting seems to appear like later on in the process. Is there a second meeting for this draft version?
No, so like right now, like I said, we're interested in hearing your all thoughts. We're going to take that information into account as we develop our scenarios and recommendations, and then bring those back to you for your confirmation at the second community meeting before we would finalize the report.
Is this not true with the second community meeting? We've already had one. Did we not? What did you say, I'm sorry? I thought we already had one community meeting. Did we not? What was the last meeting about that?
There may have been a community meeting regarding the urban growth boundary and recommended addition to that. That is kind of separate from this study. The area that is recommended to be included in the UGB is obviously very important for us, because if that recommendation would be approved, we want our study area to reflect that. We don't want it to be smaller, or we don't want to unnecessarily plan for areas that aren't going to be included in the UGB. I'm not sure if that's the meeting you're talking, Andrew.
Adam, since this is live streamed, if you could repeat
Oh,
the question.
yeah, I'm sorry.
and answer it.
Yeah, I apologize. They told me that in advance, and I didn't listen. The question was, is this not the second community meeting? And I believe there was a previous community meeting specific to the urban growth boundary study and recommendation. This is our first meeting for this Goose Creek land use infrastructure and roadway network project. Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions, one which I asked you personally, but a few minutes ago, when you were talking about this, you said you held a stakeholder meeting today. And my question is, who are the stakeholders if not us?
Yeah, so we had a couple meetings earlier this afternoon. One was with transportation a transportation focus with other city staff, as well as TMA and regional transportation planning partners. There was also one with some of the development and design community about current plan projects and other interests in the area. We have some tomorrow regarding utilities and other city leadership. But yes, you all are stakeholders. That's why we're having this meeting this evening.
And the second question I have, which is I told you personally, it's very disappointing to me that the county, of which many of us live in the county and are a part of the county, it's absolutely astonishing to me that there's nobody from the county to speak.
Okay. So that question was essentially, why is no one from the county here speaking or participating? I can tell you county representatives have been invited to a meeting that's going to be occurring next week. And also, I believe, as we discussed earlier, the urban growth boundary addition would have to be approved by the county. My understanding is, and Andrew can chime in if I'm wrong, that they have to create a study committee for that. And then they have up to 6 months to conduct that study. Again, ultimately how that urban growth boundary discussion shakes out, all of our land use and transportation analysis is still important. If the urban growth boundary would ultimately be changed at a smaller area, obviously those land use recommendations are probably no longer necessary or applicable because that property stays under county planning jurisdiction. But again, this is a city-led effort. These would be, for the most part, city infrastructure investments, transportation improvements, and not led by the county.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Earlier you talked about the intersection or the interchange, the potential future interchange on I-65.
Yes.
And there are two scenarios you're working out.
Yeah.
Who is driving the request for that interchange? Is that the city? Is that the county, the state? How is that initiated?
Sure. So this question was regarding the potential new interchange scenarios. Who is driving or leading that discussion? And for the most part, that is the city. It's not something that was initiated by TDOT. The city understands that the Goose Creek Bypass Interchange is already operating essentially near capacity. And there are still, like I mentioned, significant development entitlements in that area that could be constructed, and that's going to further obviously stress the interchange and other thoroughfare network. So the city is interested in facilitating that conversation with TDOT about the possibility for an interchange.
And that Long Lane overpass?
Yes.
That's not going to be a on-off overpass?
Correct. That is just Long Lane going over I-65. Yes, sir.
I guess I'm a little confused. Tonight's meeting does not involve the urban growth boundary.
That's correct. The question was if tonight's meeting is about the urban growth boundary, and no. This is about land use, infrastructure, and roadways. Generally in the Goose Creek Basin, it does not have a bearing on if the urban growth boundary is expanded or not. That will ultimately be determined by the county.
But none of this can take place until the county approves it, right?
Well, like I said at the beginning, there's already 815 acres that are in the city. While they're outside of the urban growth boundary, now that they're in the city very much does need to plan for them and have planning jurisdiction over them. So at a minimum, like I said, we need to get that addressed. The larger portion of the Goose Creek Basin, we will be making recommendations for, but yes, we'll have to see if the UGB addition is approved. Yes, sir.
So, if the land is right now part of UGB,
Mm-hmm.
still is it like part of Goose Creek Basin? Or even though it's like it's part of the county right now?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So
If the, okay,
if a parcel,
parcel is part of Williamson County,
yes.
but still it's like it's part of the UGB,
Mm-hmm.
and is it still going to be considered as part of the Goose Creek Basin?
Yes. So the question was, if a parcel is currently in the UGB but has not been annexed into the city, will it be part of this study? And yeah, if it's in that area that I pointed out earlier, if it's generally in the Goose Creek Basin, yes, it will be part of the study. And if it's already in the UGB, it should have already had some level of planning done for it, but we may be revisiting or reexamining and updating that plan. Okay. You okay?
See, we have like, we have been hearing like there is a UGB extension that's going to happen from Williamson County coming in May. So, but what about the parcels which are right now in UGB,
Mm-hmm.
but not yet? Is there like any annexation for those things? Is there any part of that that's going to happen, or we need to wait in the study itself?
Yeah, so this study is not, his question was if the parcels are in the urban growth boundary, but not currently within the city, how does that relate to annexation? And the short answer is this process will not result in specific parcels being annexed. If you're within the UGB, the annexation process is different than if you're outside of the UGB. I think that's probably the biggest factor. But again, what this plan would do is study and make a recommendation for should you want your property to be annexed and potentially developed, what would be appropriate. No one's going to make you annex your property. No one's going to make you sell your property to a developer. That's not part of this.
But are they both independent of each other, like annexation process, or like do we need to wait till the study is complete?
I'm
Any new properties?
sure. I might defer that to a city staff person. I think the intent is to certainly leave some time, and once we break, we're all going to be available for additional questions or discussion, and I might direct you to Andrew or Emily for that.
Could they not answer that now publicly, though, because I think maybe some.
Well, if he's interested in annexing or having his property annexed, he can, that could be initiated. It could happen separate of this process. Yes. Yeah.
The, part of this process is to inform what recommendations are for the parcels that have been recently annexed
Mm-hmm.
that don't have an Envision Franklin land use plan.
Yeah.
Is there a chance with that Envision Franklin modification that with other existing parcels within the city that are inside that, or I would say within the urban growth boundary?
Sure.
Is it possible that the Envision Franklin could change for the parcels?
Yeah. So this question was for properties that have already been covered by Envision Franklin. Could the recommendations for those properties change? And I'll just point out that this study will make recommendations for Envision Franklin amendments. It will not make the amendments themselves. My understanding is the city has started discussions about an Envision Franklin update that will happen probably shortly after this process concludes, maybe. And I think the answer is yes, there could be there could be changes to current Envision Franklin recommendations. I can't speak to necessarily what those might be right now. But certainly as we understand how the current transportation network is functioning, or how it will be functioning maybe as some of these projects come online, we might need to revisit some of those previous recommendations to make sure they can either still be supported in that intensity or form, or have other developments occurred in that area that mean, this greenfield site or whatever, given changes in context, may be best suited for something else. Yeah.
Sorry. So if we are in this considered area,
Mm-hmm.
under consideration, could we still sell our house? Or is it due?
Oh, yeah.
Do we need to wait until that's determined?
So the question was, if a property is in the area as part of the recommended UGB addition, could
Without stipulation?
could a home or property still be sold without stipulations? And absolutely. This in no way creates a moratorium on, there's nothing the city can do to stop you from selling your property. There's obviously issues with like illegal subdivisions or things like that, but no, this doesn't have any bearing on that. So with that, again, I just want to say thank you. Again, if you didn't sign in, or if you want to be emailed, please fill that in. If you haven't participated in the exercises, please do so. Myself, colleagues, and city representatives will be available for questions, and we'd love to continue the conversation. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Eric, did we have chat? We're fine. Okay.
So the 815 acres that are